The story of Gideon is one that I've always enjoyed because there are just so many lessons that come from this. We're in Judges 6, verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. The opening just gives us a picture of where things are and what's happening in the days and in the life of Israel. And it leads me very quick just to try to say and try to imagine, why is this happening? How can it be like this? A nation that was as powerful as Israel was at a point in time to now be hiding in caves, finding places to get away from their enemy. Because, in fact, their enemy is incredibly powerful and has come and infiltrated the land. And so the scene here just paints a very powerful picture of Israel's decay. We continue in verse 3. When the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock in their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and the animals. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So here we have the cycle happening once again. The enemy is so great. The description that they were like locusts. I don't know that we've ever experienced anything quite like an invasion of locusts, okay? But we can see about it in biblical times. We read about such things, and we might be able to envision what that would be like. When locusts would come into a land and just destroy it, would eat everything that was green, leaving it bare. Well, that's the description of what's happening with the enemies of Israel. That's what they are doing. That's what's happening there in the land. Now, years ago, remember that the Midianites had been defeated by Moses a long time ago. But now they have strength once again. And really, I don't know so much is it that they have strength. I'm sure that's part of it. But the bigger issue is that Israel doesn't have any strength. Because God's not walking with them right now because they've turned away from God. And so there's a separation between them and the blessings that would come from God because they're walking and living in sin. They are worshiping and following other gods, idols. And so God's not with them. They have no strength. And so the best they can do is run to the wilderness and find caves to hide themselves in. Finally, they are brought low and they cry out to God. Let's read just a little more. Verse 7. When the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them from before you and gave you the land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." What are some thoughts or comments that's rolling through your mind right now about the storyline? Anything coming to your mind? What are you thinking about? How could they abandon God and worship false idols? When they have known and they have seen the power of God, God gives a little bit of a reminder of that. I brought you out of Egypt. You know, to maybe spur some memory in the generations now that have passed. But they know the stories. They've heard these stories. Or at least they should know those stories. And it's like, how could they turn from Jehovah God to these gods that are fashioned by the hands of men? Ben?
I think the answer, or part of that answer, and what we need to remind ourselves of is the span of time here.
Okay.
And we've said this several times, but 15 minutes later, they're worshiping idols again, and there's enough time passing that a new generation is coming along, and think about how quickly people turn away from the Lord just in our own experience. When maybe someone that we know who in just a few years goes from being very fervent and zealous to very cold and distant from the Lord. So keep in mind the time frame.
I want so very much for this to become real to us this way. It's so easy when we look back at Israel, we say sometimes, oh, Israel, what's wrong with them? Why don't they get it? Why don't they understand? Why do they keep making these stupid mistakes? How can it be that way? But the story is written here for us. It's written so that we learn something from this. Because we can be just like that. And sometimes it does not take that 40 years or 80 years for a generation or two to pass. Sometimes it happens much quicker than that. And I think that's part of the lessons here that we need to learn. Read.
If you're reading it for the first time, when God leads with, don't you remember what I did? I delivered you previously. If you don't know what's coming next, you might be expecting, and I will deliver you now. But before he gets to that, he reminds them, you haven't obeyed. And there's an analog to today where before there's deliverance, there is a person has to recognize their sinful state, and they got to ponder it.
Right.
Right? The poor in spirit are the ones for whom.
Okay, and it reminds me of another point goes with that too. When God is saying something to them about this, it's not that he's saying, remember how I delivered you before, and I'm not going to do that again. He doesn't say that, does he? At the same time, the lesson that comes out of this, for there to be deliverance, it has to be on the same criteria that he offered deliverance before. And that is they were willing to follow him, turn to him, submit to him, humble themselves before.
If Israel already wiped out the Midianites, how did the Midianites get back?
Well, they didn't wipe them out enough, did they?
Well,
Which you see, this is going to be the problem. God told them about that. When they came into the land, of course, because that was before they actually came into the land that they did that. But when they came into the land to destroy, to wipe everybody out, and they don't do that, and God said there'll be authority. And that's happening. That's happening.
I was going to say, maybe I'm a little different when I read this. Sometimes I go, okay, so I'm not thinking.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And because there's times that I read that and I go, yeah. And I put myself in that. How
Right.
could you have forgotten so quickly?
Okay,
How
so
could you?
And that's the takeaway, Jimmy. That's what I want us to take away as we go through all of these episodes over and over again. We can look at them and say, what's wrong with them? It can be us too. It's different issues, it's different factors maybe that can trouble us, but in some ways it's all the same. It's when we take our eyes off of God and being submissive to him, there's going to be a problem and there's going to be problems to come. And basically what God says here is that, but you have not listened to me. That's telling words. You have not listened to me. And again, we've said this before. If we can imagine how disappointed God must have been. How disappointed God must have been. Because he knows very well all that he has done for them. He knows all that he has done to try to draw them in, to bring them, to save them, time and again at this point. And if we can just imagine how disappointed he must be. Okay, let's look a little farther here. So God sends the deliverer. We're into that cycle now. God is going to send a deliverer to them. This is an interesting part of the story to me. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was thrashing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But sir, Gideon replied, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hand of Midian. All right, there might be a couple of points we pull from that. Think about the story. Think about what's unfolding. Get a picture of this. Gideon in the winepress threshing out wheat when this angel of the Lord appears to him. And just trying to roll this through our mind a little bit. And when the angel of the Lord says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Is that what you're thinking about? Gideon at this point, that boy, here is a mighty warrior. Is that what you're thinking about, Gideon?
He said that God abandoned them, yet even his own father had
Oh.
altar and idols there that he was supposed to tear down.
So the angel of the Lord comes to Gideon, and now there's an exchange here that takes place. You know, Gideon, you mighty warrior. We're kind of struggling our way through this. Mighty warrior? I'm not seeing that in Gideon at this point in his character. You know, and then in this bigger picture, when Gideon responds, says, "Why has the Lord abandoned us?" Who abandoned whom? I mean, yes, there is this sense in which God has abandoned. He's left them alone. But who turned away from whom? It was Israel who turned away from God. And if we could just make this point, and we have this in our mind, that it's like, while God does everything he can to preserve, to save Israel, and to help Israel, God is not running after Israel, beating them down and chasing them down, grabbing them by the feet, and they fall to the ground, and God saying, "Here, I'm going to help you now." And sometimes I think we can have this sense that God is just going to chase us down when we are living in sin. Now look, I don't want to take away the idea that God wants us. He wants to call us. He wants to draw us in. He's doing everything he can to pull us to his side, so to speak. But to paint a picture of God chasing us down as though he is going to make us obey him, that's not a picture I ever find in Scripture. We sure don't see it here. Is God calling Israel? Yes, he has always been. And when they humble themselves and they fall low, it's interesting how God is always there, presented in some way that God is there. So it must have seemed to Gideon and to all that in fact God had just abandoned them. But actually it was they who abandoned God. So let's look at this story just a little farther. Yes. Yeah, Lance.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that despite the 7 years of false worship, the 7 years of oppression, Gideon seems to imply that they still know about God. And whenever they go low enough, they still turn to God. Like they know that only he can save them despite they've been worshiping Baal and these other gods for years.
I think this is a good point, that there is still this recognition of God. And interesting that the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon, one who has this remembrance, one who seemingly still has some understanding and knowledge or attachment to Jehovah God, that he is the one who is called into the picture at this point. I think that's an interesting point here. Verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not now sending you?" "But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." And the Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites together." Have you noticed a little transition here from the angel of the Lord that came to Midian to the Lord speaking to him? You catch that? Kind of an interesting thing that's happening right here, give me some talking points here. When we think about the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in strength," what are some things that come to your mind? I mean, again, already I got this picture in my mind of Gideon not being so strong. He's hiding in a wine press, all right? Yeah, give me some talking points with this. Well, what are you seeing? The Lord turned to him, "Go in strength." What comes to your mind? So is there a sense, or is there a way that the Lord is still with Israel? Yeah. How so?
Well, I'm not exactly.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean,
Well, don't mess me up.
but when we're teaching our kids, this is a really good point in that Gideon said, well, if you were really with us, then you wouldn't have let this happen. That is exactly what people say today.
It is.
That is exactly what people say, that wants the Lord to just be this kind, benevolent Lord. They want to live the way they want to live. That's exact. So the thinking, in teaching our children, nothing has changed in that we have to follow God and obey Him,
Yeah.
and not be able to say, well, this wouldn't be happening. Why is He letting all these things, horrible things happen?
Continuing with that thought as far as, for our purpose and for teaching our children, the next quarter that will come to Glenn, we are seeing the discipline of God as it happens over and over. Sometimes when we receive blessings, we are quick to attribute that to God. And in fact, blessings may be just that, a blessing from God. Let's appreciate blessings that we see. But I'll have to admit, I'm a little less appreciative when I'm facing some difficulties in life that I can't understand why this is happening and why are these things going on in my life, where later perhaps I realize that was really tough, but I know I won't do that again. And I've learned something from that. Do we thank God for such blessings? We easily attribute good things when times were good. Gideon remembers, has at least been told about times when God has blessed Israel. He remembers those times. He is certainly not looking at what's happening now as a blessing. And I'm not sure, I guess I can't say that necessarily that God is intended this to be a blessing. It's discipline. Sometimes discipline is the greatest blessing that we can receive. If we can just let that kind of work through for a moment. Glenn and Phil.
You were talking about the angel speaking and then the Lord speaking. We haven't gotten there yet, but when I was reading it, verse 23, after the angel had departed, then the Lord spoke to him again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how did that happen? Okay, so there's some I don't know exactly on how these things happen, where God is continuing to message and talk with Gideon, give him direction, for some things. An angel of the Lord, or is this God manifesting himself in some way? I don't know, but it's an interesting dialogue.
They stopped fearing God, and God told them in verse 10 not to fear the gods of the Amorites.
Yeah. Yes, right?
That's why they're hiding in their caves.
Mm-hmm.
Their gods. So the God that they should be fearing, who's a jealous God, and he's not a God that you just summon whenever you get into a crisis.
Okay, and I love that point there too. A couple of things. There's this reminder to them that these gods that are around you are nothing. They have no power at all. And yet they have been in fear of them, serving them, bowing before them. And Jehovah God is giving this reminder: I'm the God that you should fear. I'm the God who has all power. I'm the God who has brought all things into existence. This is the reminder here that he is giving to them. And again, perhaps we get this impression just how low Israel has been brought. Again, hiding in these caves, thinking of those things. Yeah.
If our understanding of God being with us is no difficulty will come to us, then we need to reevaluate our understanding of what it means for God to be with us.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus came to this earth, Emmanuel, God with us, and his life was full of difficulty.
Yeah.
He was closer to God than any of us.
Right. I love the point. Very well. All right. I love the story. There's so many applications. I mean, as we see these events unfolding in the life of Gideon and Israel, there's a lot of points and applications here. And so, the Lord turned to him and he said, go in strength. Well, go. Gideon, I want you to go do something. Gideon doesn't seem all that excited about the idea of that. Go in strength Where's the strength? I don't see that in Gideon. Go and save Israel, and he tells them to do. And then, I am sending you. These are all points here that have been made in this dialogue that's taken place, or what the Lord has said.
Gideon's response to the angel of the Lord reminds me very much of the picture of Moses burning the bush.
That's right.
I'm not adequate.
Yeah, that is very true. We will see, just as Moses, the Bible says Moses the meekest man of all the earth. We see some of those attributes, I think, over the storyline here with Gideon, as well with that. Let's read a little bit farther here, verse 17. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that is really, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering that is set before you." So Gideon is going to go through an episode 3 times here, basically saying, okay, I hear what you're saying. All right, I kind of need you to really prove to me that this is for real. And he goes and he prepares this offering, and it's put on the altar on the stone, and the angel of God, just consumes that by fire. And so it's not done with that. There's a question in my mind. Just what do you think about Gideon asking for a sign? What do you think about that? Yeah, no different than some of the rest of them, perhaps? Lance?
It's a lot like Moses needing his reassurance.
Okay.
And just another comment about Moses. Whenever Moses had that appearance, it said the angel of the Lord appeared in the burning bush. So again, the angel of the Lord and God were there at the same time.
Yeah.
And just a little interesting thing. It says the angel of the Lord, not an angel of the Lord. And this angel accepted worship.
Mm-hmm. Right. The worship belongs to God. So yeah, you're tracking right there, I think so. Okay, so again, there's this part of me that looks at Gideon, and it's like, really, Gideon, you gonna make God prove himself? Well, in fact, he does 3 times. Because next comes the fleece. Remember, the fleece has to be full of dew, and he wrings it out. God, please, let me just give me one more time, prove to me. And there's this part of me that thinks like, Gideon, I'm kind of disappointed in that. But God doesn't seem to be disappointed, because God goes along with that every time and demonstrates to him something. Joe?
Really give the angel credibility that he was an angel, and he went out until the first time he realized after the angel accepted the sacrifice, burning up with the staff, that, you definitely are an angel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A little bit of convincing, all right? So, may make us feel a little bit better if at times we need a little convincing. Okay? Let's look on here just a little bit more. So, God is going to give some more responsibility here to Gideon. Idols were such a plague to Israel. We're still in chapter 6, verse 25, we begin to read. That same night the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of it this height. Use the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men in town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, with the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and a second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. And they asked each other, "Who did this?" And when they carefully investigated, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did this." Interesting episode here as it unfolds. I don't know exactly, what these idols look like. Well, Well, we probably do. We have some idea because of what's been archaeologists have found and stuff like that. It's interesting when he said to go cut this down. And in fact, I think what this is talking about is trees that have been cut or topped off, and there's a tall stump that is there, and they have carved their god, into that tall stump. So it's still attached to the ground. In some later episodes, we'll see where there were groves of like idols that have been cleared out. Go clear out the groves, And so that's what he's doing. He's out there cutting that down or chopping that down. And so the townspeople are upset. I mean, look, you've cut down our God, is what they are seeing. And so in verse 30 it goes on, the men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. So that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him, because he has broken down Baal's altar. I love the fact that Joash has stood up here. And it's basically said, why are you so upset? Somebody tore down, this Baal, this god. You want to kill my son because of that? Well, why didn't this God do something himself to stop this? And it's just an incredible story of this demonstrating that, we've been serving a God that has no power at all. He cannot even save himself. I think that's really powerful. That's just an interesting part of the story here, I believe, as that unfolds. And so, should we have to fight for Baal? After all, he's a god. Can't he just take care of himself, is the idea. So, before we get into this next part of this story, we've got to get the lay of the land a little bit. Because there's about to be a battle that takes place. Not in the way that we would originally think of it being. Verse 33 here of chapter 6 says this, now the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other eastern people joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Just an interesting thought to kind of work that through your mind for a moment. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Israelites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and to Asher and Zebulun and Naphtali, so they too went up to meet them. Let's go back to our map, and let's just think about where this is happening. And there's more coming up here. Let's just understand that, of course, the eastern tribes, the Midianites and those, they have crossed over the Jordan River. And they've gathered here in this plain of Jezreel, right in here. The tribes that are being talked about, Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, all right here. There's a battle that's about to set up and take place right there. And let's just get a picture and understand what's going on. We talked a few moments ago about these other signs from God with the fleece. Here Gideon is starting to see, well, there's some big things about to happen. God, I need a little more help. I increase my faith. Give me a demonstration that truly this is you that is causing this. Let's look again here where we're going in the story. And this map is not the clearest, but it's just the best I could come up with some of the locations on here. The Valley of Jezreel we talked about already. Gideon is there. He's received these instructions from God there. There are thousands of soldiers assembled for battle that are here. A whole lot from the eastern side of the Jordan, the enemies that are there. Thousands of soldiers. Gideon is at the spring of Harod. And that's right about here, kind of south of the hill of Morah. It's not on the map, but it's right about there. The Midianites are to the north up here of the hill of Morah. They're near this hill, this mountain, some would say, with a huge army. And in the text, it's going to say something about that those who tremble may leave Mount Gilead. I have no idea what that means, and nobody else does either. There's no mountain or town in that area called Gilead. There is over on the other side, but not there. So I don't know if it's just symbolic in some way or what that is about. But what's going to happen here is that there are going to be, in this storyline, 22,000 soldiers of Gideon who leave. Here's where where this is all taking place. You look at this picture right here, and if you were standing at the spring of Herod, and you were looking across this valley, here is the hill of Morah, and out here are thousands of soldiers, enemy soldiers. And it's like you can see them. And I've thought about this at times when I read through this episode and wonder what it's like being a soldier on this side and likely greatly outnumbered by all the enemy soldiers are there. And at night you can see the campfires out there all over, and you're trying to estimate and wonder just how many are on that side. How many soldiers have we got here against us? And this picture I think is so cool. This picture that helps us to see. Here is the spring of Herod, right here. And the hill of Morah that we're just looking at, it's over here. And Mount Gilboa back here, because the spring is at the foot of Mount Gilboa, the text would tell us. And this here is all part of that Jezreel Valley. And so we're just getting all of that in our mind and understanding a little more about the episode that's about to take place. Here's the spring. You can go to that spring of Herod, today at the foot of Mount Gilboa. The ones where there were some who lapped water up like a dog. There were some who got on their hands and knees and drank water out of the spring. It's interesting to me that the spring is still there. I'm not sure it's as big as it once was, but it's right there in that. When you're standing at that spring and you turn and you look around right there, you see that valley where all the soldiers would have been waiting. It was right there. And so it's here at the spring that there's going to be a time and a point of kind of choosing who is going to stay and who is going to move on. In chapter 7, it says, verse 1, early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Herod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into your hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her. Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." 22,000 men left, and 10,000 remained. So that gives us an idea of how many were there with Gideon. There was at least 32,000, but God is saying that's too many. Because when you win this battle, you think you did this on your own. And so there's going to be an elimination of many. And it's going to be a battle with only just a few. Our time is gone. We got about a minute here. And very quickly, thoughts or comments you have right now at this point of the lesson. Anything you want to add to this? Phil? It will be. And so when it's narrowed down to the 300 that go to battle that we'll talk about very briefly on Wednesday evening, when they left that battle, there was no question in the mind of the Israelites that it was God who saved them, and it was God's power that gave them victory. And in fact, that would be the same conclusion the enemies would have to have as well, that Jehovah God, their God, has all power. Our gods didn't do anything, to preserve us or to save us. Real quickly.
When they went to battle, they didn't take swords and shields and all that. They took a pitcher with a light and a trumpet.
Yep.
They didn't have a spare hand to use.
God is going to take care of the battle and is going to turn the enemy upon themselves. Wednesday night, God willing, we'll talk about the battle there just for just a moment, and then we'll try to move on. We spent a lot of time with Gideon today. I just really wanted to. It's just such an incredible story. I wanted us to have that in our mind. Wednesday night, we're going to have to run a little quicker to catch up.